As I say, hello everyone, and welcome to the, I will just enable the live transcription. Thank you everyone for reminding. So welcome to our virtual seminar series, Folk Cultures and Everyday Objects. My name is Claire Omani. I was a chair of the Design History Society up until September, when my colleague Sally Ann Huxtable took over that role. So I'm here hosting my last sort of collaboration with the Society, which is a great pleasure. These virtual seminar series are part of an important role in the Society, which is for our DHS ambassadors, in this case, Wiktoria Kijowska, a student at the Royal College of Art, to propose a theme around which we might invite colleagues from around the world to reflect on current thinking about a provocative concept. And Wiktoria proposed to us that she would like us to think about folk cultures in everyday objects. And our conversation began around her own practice, which is, I think, very much enriched by that relationship to folk cultures. So that conversation led us to then explore the ways in which that might also open up historical approaches, to consider the ways in which a variety of nations, a variety of periods approach this complex relationship between traditional cultures that are localized, but also that have relationships to inventiveness as well as the sustaining of tradition. To think about tensions around appropriations of localized cultures by constituencies who are not part of those communities, to see the light and shade of that relationship today. So we're thrilled to have a set of speakers joining us from India, from Mexico, from Northern Europe, as well as the United States today, presenting us their latest thinkings around these themes. So I will just hand over to my colleague now, to Wiktoria, in order to have her introduce our first colleague who joins us from Mexico. So thank you so much for taking part.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Clay, for your introduction, and a warm welcome to everyone for joining the FACE seminar in AI for Cultures and Everyday Objects. I should also mention that if you have any questions or comments, just leave them in the chat box, and we'll get to those at the very end of all of the presentations. And so now I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, Giselle Hernandez Romero. She has a PhD in Design and Urban Studies from UAM, a master's degree in industrial design from the UNAM, and a degree in industrial design from UAEM. She's a member of the National Systems of Researchers. She's a professor at the UAEM from 2008 to the present. She obtained the honorable mention at the 10th National Design Biennial and the National Design Award in Research category. She belongs to the academic network of Design and Emotions. Giselle has given lectures and participated as a speaker in national and international colloquiums on topics related to design, ergonomics, emotions, and memory. So over to you now, Giselle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, my research was mentioned before. It's about design ethics towards indigenous craftsmanship. And well, if you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, well, as you probably know, Mexican culture is very rich and diverse. According to government data, there is a register of 12 million of artisans. Many of them belong to indigenous communities. And the artistic expressions are manifested in a wide variety of materials, processes, techniques, as you can see in the slide, right? We have here some examples of some of the most important works doing by the artisans in Mexico. So please, can you go to the next? to the next slide, please.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, the problem that I would like to discuss is about the appropriation, right? The appropriation of indigenous culture in the fashion industry has been one of the most recurring problems in the last decade. In 7 years, 23 brands plagiarized the indigenous design of Mexico in 39 cases. So it's not just the copy or the profit motive, sometimes disguised as a tribute. They are commodifying, trivializing, and assuming these designs as their own. Obviously, the communities don't get any kind of money or any kind of benefit from the use of these of their designs. So in this context, we ask, what are the limits of inspiration and homage to indigenous design when incorporating them into contemporary products? How to prevent designs with a strong symbolic charge from being trivialized without the slightest respect? And as designers, what is the role we play in this process, right? In the academy, in the process of learning, teaching, design, what is the ethics that must prevail from design? Okay, the next, please. So here we have some of the most important examples of this kind of problem that we have in Mexico. We have companies such as the Mexican Pineda Cobalin passing through Carolina Herrera, the French Isabel Marant and Dior, Nestlé, the American Madwell and Ralph Lauren, the Spanish Mango, Desigual, Intropia, and Zara, the latter with the record for plagiarism. So here we have some of these this kind of appropriation that these companies made from the art made by the artisans in Mexico. And most of the time, well, we here in Mexico, we don't have the legal framework to protect the indigenous, right? In this moment, there are many discussions in the government about what to do. What are the legal process that we must have in order to protect the indigenous design? The next, please. So in this context, well, here the proposal that we were working in order to try to identify what can we do from the design side, right? Specifically from the academy, is we consider really important that when we approach to the design of the indigenous people, we must understand and spread what the design represents for the community. It is really important to understand the worldview, what are the meaning, the symbolic, why this design is important for them, right? And in this case, it's not only to learn about the theory about this, but also to practice and learn the traditional processes and techniques. In this case, we must learn the work, the emotion, and the talent necessary behind each piece, right? It is a good way to really understand what is behind each of these pieces. If we follow this process with students or even as a professional designers, it is possible to have these five goals. First, to discuss with the community. This is really the focal point, to always have this discussion, this conversation with all the community to understand if the project that we want to do is relevant. It is relevant to use the indigenous design in these everyday objects. For example, a question that we could make is it appropriate to use their symbols on footwear? Is it correct to use them in in an everyday object. Also, it is important to discuss what is the level of similarity that we could use from the design, right? If it is an exact copy, if it is a reinterpretation, if that is only similar in some parts. It is important also to always have in mind the original meaning. Sometimes the designs of the indigenous people, it's very symbolic. It's about their worldview. It's about their ancestors. And of course, it's not correct to use these kind of symbols in an everyday product, right? The last part is the authorization. This is in the specific case of Mexico, this is a part in which we don't have the legal framework, right? But it is important in this case when we discuss with the community, to have the authorization of all of them, of all the community, or the majority of them. And the last one is, what is the benefit for the community when they allow to other people to use their designs? In the previous cases that I show you, there is no benefit, right? The companies just said, well, it's a tribute, but obviously the profit, the benefits are for the company, not for the community. So we consider that it is important to have this approach when we are trying to make or to use this kind of designs. Always do it from the respect, in the most respectful form, right? We have to respect the dignity of this community. We must respect their way of life and their and what is behind all these kind of designs. And this is all for my part. Thank you very much. With this, I end my presentation.
Thank you so much, Isel. It was such an interesting presentation, and you raised very important topics. So our next speakers are Andrew Balius and Ishan Khosla. Andreu Balius is a type designer based in Barcelona. He designs retail and custom typefaces and has been awarded with several excellence in type design for his type design work. He holds a PhD in design from the University of Southampton and teaches typography and type design at EINA, University School of Design and Art in Barcelona. And Ishan Khosla is a Delhi-based visual artist, designer, and researcher with an MFA in design from the School of Visual Arts, New York. He runs his own studio, Ishan Khosla Design. His work has been exhibited and published in several magazines and specialized design books. He has been given several design awards. So over to you two. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Wiktoria, and thank you for DHS for having both of us here. We are delighted and honored. So we are both giving the talk today. My partner, Andrew Balius, as you said, from Barcelona, and myself, Ishan Khosla, from Dehradun, India. And so I'll start. So we're both partners of the Typecraft initiative, which I'm going to be talking about in the next slide. But I just wanted to emphasize that all the work we do is related to folk cultures and everyday objects. So this is really a great forum for us to be here. Thank you. We can now move on to the next slide. So the Typecraft initiative was established in 2012 with the aim to engender greater exchange between urban designers and rural craftspeople, as well as tribal artists. So on one hand, it allows designers to work with the rich crafts of South Asia, but on the other, it allows artisans to try out new ways to represent their craft to suit new audiences, contexts, and mediums. We always start by understanding the context and medium of the craft to ensure that the community also understands how their craft will get transformed into a typeface and what it means for something to become digital and disseminated around the world. So all craftspeople are also paid fairly as suggested by local groups like NGOs that we work with. Yeah, so I think we can go to the next slide and Andrea will talk about that.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, each typeface or font design is based on a different folk craft or tribal art. That means that the typefaces are based from tattoos on the skin to embroidery on cloth or fabric. Every project involves working with a group of craft women from different parts of the country, from different parts of India. While folk culture is translated into typography, design methodologies are introduced into the craft practices. Also, community building is a vital aspect of the typecraft project, since it's not only about the creation of typefaces. I would say that typefaces is just a medium. What is important is sharing expertise in design with the craft community and sharing a spirit of collaboration. It's important to remark that during the process, we don't take control of the making, but being just facilitators and giving time for the folk artists to explore forms and shapes, and afterwards letters. Craft women are allowed the ability to think as creators and not being just relegated to just be executors of a certain part of the craft process. Next slide for Ishan, please.
Thank you. So letters and type are important from several perspectives. Firstly, since letters are decontextualized from the motifs and patterns that the craftswomen are used to working with, it challenges them to work in new ways and think about their own craft in very new and innovative manners. Secondly, letters are also associated with literacy and independence, which is valued by the mostly illiterate craftswomen we work with. What you see in these images left to right, the leftmost image shows, for instance, the barmer, katab, or patchwork craft in the original form. So it's a patchwork which is then stitched onto another sheer fabric, as you can see on the leftmost slide. Then to the right of it, you see initial explorations in, I don't know if you see my cursor, but the one in pink is like a bee, but it's been constructed out of paper, which the women have worked on initially to kind of change this leftmost form, which they're used to making, into something else, that is letters. From paper, we come on to cloth at the bottom. And then in the middle, you see Nirmala here. She's actually one of the more advanced artists. She's even sketching, because not all of them know how to sketch, but she started to sketch based on these materials that you see. Yes, that's the woman in the middle. And then on the right, you see two more images of the bee. The top one is just showing you the cloth being cut out. It's called patchwork, so it's cut out like that. And the bottom one is actually the digital version once the font has been developed. So I think back to Andrew. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Thank you. Well, as you can see, each letter shape has a particular visual vocabulary that must be interpreted and translated into a typographic language, following, of course, the conventions of type design. But we try to respect always the original drawings, the original ideas that have been already created by the craft women. The typefaces resulting from this co-design process with the communities are also a way to visualize and celebrate the local craft and the people that is behind this craft. As you may suppose, font production is an independent part of the process. When the workshop with the craft women is over, the font is what will remain of the whole experience. So we digitize carefully the original drawings, or we just scan the original craft embroideries in order to digitize later the original designs. From these drawings, we produce the fonts, and as you can see, it's a more specialized and technical part that is developed in our design studios, both in Barcelona and in New Delhi. Of course, all the money that we get from font licensing, when we get all these fonts already designed and produced, all the money that we get from font licenses goes to these communities in return. Okay, next slides for Ishan, please.
Thank you. So typecraft is used in various educational situations. The first image on the left shows it being used as handmade individual letters, almost like a Scrabble set, you can think of it, but in cloth, made by the craftswomen themselves based on the letters that they had created, used to learn English in primary schools. The second image on the top right shows the typecraft workshop happening at the University of Edinburgh. So such workshops happen all around the world, where design students get a sense of an alternate way to actually construct letter forms without the use of computers, but they also get sensitized to the various craft and the communities that engage with handmaking around the world, especially, of course, in South Asia, which I'm more familiar with. The third image at the bottom shows the folk art of Mithila, or Madhubani, made into an ideogram. Basically, it's a letter form with images inside it. It's in Hindi, in the Hindi alphabet or Devanagari script, used for primary education, but it actually shows two people doing yoga, and the letter spells yo. So it's yo for yoga, if that's how you would learn that letter form. So I think for the same slide, Andrew has something more to add, and then we're almost done.
Yeah, a type design is used as a medium to facilitate the empowerment and strengthening of artisan communities. It's not only, as I said before, it's not only about the creation of new fonts. It's not only about doing new typefaces in order to provide visibility to a certain craft practices, but also to share our design experience with a community of artisans within the framework of a collaborative type design process. And that's all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bo. That was such a great presentation, and the fonts look so intricate and beautiful. So our next speaker is, I should also mention that if you have any questions for any of the speakers, just leave them in the chat box and then we'll answer them at the end of all of the presentations. So our next speaker is Aya Freymane. She's a full-time academic faculty member of TU Dublin School of Art and Design since 2021. From 2008 till 2021, Aya was an associate professor of design faculty, Art Academy of Latvia. She advocates design as a method of creating happy and satisfied societies, and her postdoctoral study in 2021 was awarded prestigious A Design Award in the category Meta Service and Strategic Design section. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Wiktoria. Thank you very much. So objectified culture based on crafts and local materials has changed not only due to 100 years of mass production, technologies and consumerism, but also according to the values and behavior of each generation. For this case study, I was curious to understand to what extent traditional and craft-based culture objects are meaningful to Generation Z in Latvia. As a reminder, Generation Z are children who have been born between 2002 and 2018. I take a symbolic value to speak about Latvian culture internationally today as we celebrate the 104-year anniversary of the proclamation of the Republic of Latvia. Next slide, please. The study is a follow-up to a design audit of the crafts and traditional culture industry in Latvia, performed in 2014 by master students of the Art Academy of Latvia. In that study, we were looking to define iconic traditional cultural products and how they impact product design development that both Latvians and tourists can clearly define as being designed in Latvia. As mentioned before, one of the aims of the design audit was to identify iconic traditional products and analyze their significance in everyday life. In 2014, 10 iconic traditional cultural products originated around 18th and 19th century were nominated by experts of the Traditional and Applied Arts Council of the Latvian National Cultural Center. Icons are strongly dependent on culture, but a particular product that is iconic in one culture might not be in another, and vice versa. Nevertheless, an iconic product is something recognizable and memorable. It is symbolic, but also with a rich historic importance. Based on excelled traditional products, we developed a survey and conducted it by asking respondents to rank the nominated products by frequency of use. I use this product in my everyday life. I use the product, but in the different material and technology or technology. I have used it, but I don't use it anymore. I have never used it. I do not recognize the product. I own the product, but I don't use it. So the next slide, please. Yeah, as iconic products are unique and often instantly recognized by people, its design, material, crafting, form, and usage have stood the test of time, remain popular, and in the memory of those who see or use it despite the passing of years. In the summer of 2022, I repeated the initial design audit survey with a group of 100 children aged from 5 to 17. The survey was conducted in person, but the answers were collected anonymously. So are folk or traditional culture objects meaningful to Generation Z? And to what extent are iconic Latvian traditional products still significant? We may say that wooden spoons, wicker baskets, knitted mittens and socks, and summer solstice flower crown wreath are iconic traditional products in Latvia, as they have not changed their appearance and function to Generation Z. 63% of children acknowledge they are using wooden spoons in their everyday life, but only 4% said they have never used them. Interesting that all children in one or the other way have had used wicker basket and knitted mittens and socks. Wicker basket keeps their significance during particular days of celebration, such as Easter time and Halloween. Despite the fact that usage is linked with traditional festivities, the product still is in use and well recognized. Knitted woolen and socks and mittens are must-have during the winter. In spite that there are mass-produced products that easily replace traditional ones, the biggest threats are loss of craft skill and also the patience that needs to knit ornamented socks or mittens. Children responded that summer solstice floral oak crowns or wreaths are used once a year during midsummer celebration Jāņi. I should highlight that in comparison to adults in 2014, wicker baskets, knitted mitten socks, as well as summer floral crowns wreaths have been more in use for the Generation Z than adults. But of course, they are parents who encourage, introduce, and provide traditional products for everyday occasions and celebrations to their children. Next slide, please. The next group of products, national costumes, ceramic bowls and pitchers, linen tablecloths, and even amber jewelry are also still in use and have not changed their meaning, appearance, and function for Generation Z. The high percentage of wearing and knowledge of national folk costumes can be explained by song and dance festival movement in Latvia, as well as the tradition to sing in choirs and dance in traditional stage dance groups. At this age, we're less likely to wear national folk dresses for celebrations, such as Midsummer or Summer Solstice, or even Independence Day, in comparison to adults. What is remarkably high is the percentage of worn jewelry that contains amber. To explain this, I will use some responses from the children. Some children said that amber protects from danger, and it's true. Some others said that I have worn amber necklaces and know that some stone is linked to the traditional practices for soothing teething pain in babies. Children highlighted that linen tablecloths and ceramic bowls and pitchers are used in celebrations for summer solstice Jāņi and winter solstice Christmas. It is again thankfully due to parents and grandparents keeping traditions alive in spite of mass-produced products that are more easily affordable. Nevertheless, there is a high percentage of Generation Z in comparison with adults in 2014 who have never used those iconic traditional products. It indicates that some products might lose their significance in Latvian society in the future, and it should be a concern. And next slide, please. And now I'd like to discuss how some iconic and traditional products have lost their meaning and relevance in both adult audience in 2014 and even more so amongst Generation Z in 2022. It is possible to say that beautifully ornamented and carved distaffs for spinning wheels and handmade tools have disappeared and are not even recognized among Generation Z. The tradition of giving an ornamented carved distaff as a present for fiancé, wife, or daughter is not meaningful, or might be even said it is useless present, as we do not have a practice to spin handmade yarn already for many years. This tradition of rich, meaningfully and aesthetically ornamented products has been replaced by simple use of some traditional signs and on almost every product you may call as national in the 21st century. Mass-produced ornaments have replaced the handmade ones built by skilled instruments have been replaced by handmade ones built by skilled carpenters. Renaissance and recognition of bread furnace among generations that might be explained in children's words again. That they have baked bread in such an oven during school excursions or field studies. 74% of adults in 2014 responded that they have never used or do not recognize a bread furnace, whereas only 46% of generations that noted that they have never used this iconic product. It indicates that experiencing traditional crafts and practices as a collective school activity might help to sustain iconic national and traditional folk cultural objects, meaning for the future generations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aya. That was so insightful. I recognize some of the objects because they're quite similar to the Polish folk objects as well. So that was interesting. So if you've got any questions, you can just leave them in the chat box and we'll answer all of them at the end. And our next speaker is Joyce Cheng. She's an associate professor of art history at the University of Oregon, where she teaches courses in modernist visual arts, poetics, aesthetic theories, and the cultural and intellectual history of the interwar period. She has published book chapters and articles on topics such as symbolism, Dada, Surrealism, and Primitivism, and has recently completed a book on the intersection between Surrealism and ethnography entitled The Persistence of Masks, Surrealism and the Ethnography of the Subject. She is currently at work on a new project on the anthropological aesthetic of the Japanese cultural icon Hello Kitty. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? It's okay.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Great. So thank you for the invitation. It's my first foray into what you're calling design history. So I have to admit my relative unfamiliarity with this field. So please forgive me if I'm saying anything that's very obvious for the practitioners and the critics in this field. So could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So to counteract the aesthetic mediocrity of industrially manufactured goods and of official taste, we know that modern design and craft theorists in the late 19th and 20th centuries frequently upheld handcrafted objects and constructions by the poor, what we might call folk crafts or arts, as model for good and beautiful and righteous making. And it's basically what these design critics mean by good. So the English founder of arts and crafts, William Morris, famously lauded the yeoman's house, the humble village church, and he has found this art of peasants to be never coarse, though often rude enough, sweet, natural, and unaffected. He considered products of modern industry inferior, right, quote, to the handiwork of an ignorant, superstitious Berkshire peasant of the 14th century, unquote. This is very lyrical language. And he also compared those mediocre industrially manufactured products to the handiwork of a wandering Kurdish shepherd or of a skin and bone oppressed Indian riot, unquote. These are from some of Morris's most seminal essays. Similarly, the artist Paul Gauguin, painter, also ceramicist and critic, saw precious French porcelains as paling by comparison to the ceramic pottery of, quote, the American Indians. Very notably, when he reviewed the decorative arts in the World's Fair in 1889, it was just the same occasion when we saw the opening of the Eiffel Tower. He was reviewing the decorative arts products in that fair, and he found it shameful that the French officials would be proud of the products of the royal manufactory of Sèvres, which are porcelains. He found it shameful that they would offer a work from Sèvres to a Kanak ambassador. And in that remark, he's of course implying that the Kanak ambassador knows of much more beautiful artisanal work of his own people, right? Much more beautiful wares than the French can produce from the royal manufacturing porcelain. In the interwar period, the Japanese critic and philosopher Yanagi Soetsu, which is the image you see down at the lower left, Yanagi Soetsu extended the primitivist logic of Western craft criticism by rejecting industrially manufactured goods as well as individually authored fine arts. Instead, Yanagi claims to find aesthetic and moral excellence in the anonymous everyday objects, minge, folk crafts made by the humble classes in his native Japan and its colonized territories, notably Korea, but also Taiwan and other places. So echoing Morris's and Gauguin's attraction to the peasants' arts, Yanagi dreamed, and here I quote, of visiting abandoned houses in the countryside in order to, quote, salvage their dust-covered tea bowls and prepare a fresh serving of tea, unquote. And by far the most radical and innovative element in Yanagi's definition of minge, folk crafts, is the notion of beauty based purely on use, utility. True minge, according to Yanagi, cannot be fragile, cannot be lavishly decorated or intricately made. It cannot be flimsy or frail or overly refined. So of course, by that definition, the porcelain that Gauguin so hated would automatically be disqualified. Minge meaning it's the crafts of people, right, of the common folk. Minge should be thick, strong, and durable. And so here I show you a kind of example that I photographed I recently took in the Minge Museum in Tokyo. There is a Korean vase. This one happens to be out of porcelain, but it's a very thick kind of fabrication. It should be thick, strong, durable, and not averse to rough handling, and it can stoutly withstand extremes of heat and cold and obey rule of utilitarian honesty in order to serve people's needs. So this fascination with folk crafts has been undeniably impactful for modern design. Yanagi's son, the industrial designer Yanagi Sori, effectively adapted the principles of minge for mass-produced objects with an emphasis on utility and anonymity and reproducibility. But modern craft and design writings' tendency to emphasize in folk arts and crafts the qualities such as material and technical honesty and functionalism also unwittingly relegates them to the realm of necessity, thereby excluding the possibility for them to serve as the vehicle for meaning-making. Consequently, not only are the symbolic contents of folk arts and crafts underappreciated, their survival in modern and contemporary design practices and material culture is also left either unrecognized or simply dismissed as kitsch. So having listened to your presentation, Isel, thank you for mentioning the importance of symbolic content in indigenous crafts, because I think now you've just given me an idea of thinking about the ethics of paying attention to symbolic content. Andrew and Ishan, your mention of the use of craft for inspiring literacy, I think is also similar in that direction. In other words, it's not simply utility or a technique and material. Can I have the next slide, please? So my question for this new direction of this research is asking whether embedded into the kitsch element, into what often we call kitsch, are actually elements of surviving folk culture. So the German critic Walter Benjamin had suggested this overlap between kitsch and folk art in several fragments and short texts he wrote in 1929 and 30. Walter Benjamin was very kind of diverse thinker, and actually he was not averse to kitsch, unlike many German critics of the same tradition that he came out of. And of the products of the culture industry of his period, and I say culture industry, of course, thinking about Adorno and Horkheimer's very severe critique of the kind of culture of mass consumerism and production in late capitalism. So interesting enough, Walter Benjamin was not very critical, was not completely jaded, right, with this mass-produced culture industry. So Benjamin was notably in his period in the 20s and 30s, he was intrigued by Mickey Mouse, who reminded him of creaturely figures in fairy tales, and in whom he suspected that the audience saw reflections of their own alienated condition under capitalism. So following Benjamin, I would like to take the Japanese cultural icon Hello Kitty as a heuristic example of this confluence of kitsch and folk art in our late capitalist globalized mass culture. It might be considered, as my title suggests, as an example of industrialized folk art, which in turn has the potential of making us rethink the kind of artisanal stereotype of folk production. For some reason, we always think of, those modernist design and crafts thinkers. We tend to think folk has to be handmade, right? So I think Hello Kitty has a potential of making us rethink that, because shifting our attention to actually the symbolic content. So if you're not familiar with Hello Kitty, I'll just say very quickly, it's one character among 400 some designed by the Japanese gifts company Sanrio since its inception in 1960. Because Hello Kitty in the popular press is often described as a cartoon character, it's probably worth stating that Sanrio was initially conceived as the equivalent more of Hallmark, so closer to Hallmark than Disney. So it was meant to specialize in gifts and related products, greeting cards, and so on and so forth, even though Hello Kitty, of course, soon achieved a status equivalent to Walt Disney's Mickey Mouse. And so in this display case, photographed by me last month at Sanrio's 60th anniversary exhibition in Kyoto's Kyocera Museum, you see the earliest Hello Kitty products from the 1970s. I'll point out a couple of traits that may be a little bit surprising. Note the used primary colors. So in other words, no pink as Hello Kitty might be currently associated with. This is in the 70s. All motifs, these are all printed motifs as almost like a decal method. All motifs on practical objects, and notably stationery, file folder, notebook, scissors, calculator, desk organizers, all used by middle-class school children, which at least fulfills one of the prominent criteria of folk crafts and arts, namely utility. At the same time, there can be no question that the image or motif of Hello Kitty serves primarily a decorative function, which in most art historical literature, I'm an art historian by training, so I have to think through these concepts. That in most art historical literature is assumed to be a function independent of utility and symbolic content. To give just one example, the Viennese art historian Alois Riegel famously wrestled in the late turn of the century, famously wrestled with this question in his consideration of the rampant lotus motif in ancient Egyptian and Near Eastern ornamental art. And Riegel ended up by rejecting a technical material explanation as well as an account based on symbolic content. So it has something to do with this having to be either or. But why, I ask, why must we restrict ourselves to one type of explanation? What if the overwhelming, seemingly irrational popularity and ubiquity of ubiquity of Hello Kitty as motif is precisely overdetermined by the aesthetic pleasure it provides as decoration. It's one function. Its convenient adaptation to all materials, plastic, textile, fabric, metal, whatever you have it. So it's a technical material explanation. And various objects. As you can see, all of these varieties of objects can serve as support. And its symbolic efficacy, as the anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss would say, of many rites and symbolic actions, right, in traditional cultures. What if the inseparability of these three functions, and I say decoration, technical material facility, and symbolic efficacy, all three, what if the inseparability of these three functions might be the very characteristic of what we consider folk art, folk culture, right? So they serve all of those functions at the same time. Can I have the next slide, please? So I wrote one essay already about Hello Kitty without sufficiently emphasizing the folk character, but I think it's very much implied. And this first essay is called The Rhetoric of Hello Kitty, which appeared in 2019 in the journal Res Aesthetic and Anthropology. And that essay was originally inspired by the French literary critic Roland Barthes, who was a great critic of contemporary culture. And it's very much inspired by Barthes' notion of the rhetoric in contemporary commercial advertisement, and the idea that the petty bourgeois consumer culture is filled with mythology that we take for granted as natural. So I try to analyze the Hello Kitty from this perspective, and I try to recognize its rhetoric, right, the way it advertises itself. But I would say rhetoric is probably the cynical take, right? Because rhetoric would mean, like, you know, something suspicious is trying to persuade us to buy and doing whatever things, manipulative rhetoric. But I think given in this context, we're talking about folk culture, why not think about rhetoric also as the symbolic content? So in this essay, I try to point out the various ways in which Hello Kitty accidentally incarnated, in a way updated, a predecessor, which is a Edo period, Japanese Edo period enjimono, which is an auspicious object called the manekineko. And the manekineko, various iterations that you see here, used to be a kind of auspicious object that would bring good fortunes to everybody who is a merchant or in the restaurants business, so basically businesses. And here on the right, you see a wood block print. And then on the upper left, you probably can see a stall. It's very interesting that that stall is selling those little beckoning cats, the manekineko, who beckons good luck as well as money, as well as customers, right? It's a cat that says hello to all those things that businesses will want. And you can see that the manekineko there is actually both a something that brings luck to the merchants, but it's itself a commodity, right? And therefore it's right there being purchased. And you can still see modern versions of manekineko in many restaurants today, notably Asian restaurants, at the front desk, at the reception desk. Can I have the next slide, please? So the symbolic content of Hello Kitty is, I think, very important, and what qualifies it as folk culture. But I wanted to also show that it's not simply by the idea of content, right? So it's also about its discursive work, how it works. So I think it's not separate from the symbolic content, but basically I wanted to show in this article that Hello Kitty works iconographically in a way that's very, very similar to how some of the structuralist anthropologists have shown how myths work. So I use the idea of Hello Kitty as a kind of chimera, and chimera means it's just hybrid figure. So it's not one thing, right? So to break it down, Hello Kitty actually uses at least three elements. It's both a girl, it's both a cat, and it's both a very big ribbon, right? And all of those things are basically combined into one. And its origin, the origin is Alice in Wonderland, which the designer explicitly borrowed from, combining the iconography of Alice and the cats in the story. And it's conflating with the domestic cats that Alice actually had in her bourgeois home, as well as Cheshire Cat, which is a mythological cat and very big. And then, of course, using the very prominent bow, which is associated with a young girl, both in Japanese and Western tradition, as well as gift giving. right? So underneath there, you have the kind of prominent knots that you find on some of the Japanese gift-giving practices. The knot that you find in furoshikis, which is a traditional wrapping method, and then on the right, mitsuhiki, which is a traditional red and white auspicious knot that you put on envelopes designated for auspicious functions. And then on the lower right, you see how these elements are actually very, very beloved, and you can even see it in a book of young adult stories. This one is The Witch's Delivery Service from 1985 that had been later on made into an animation film by Miyazaki. And there is the cover of the actual book where you see these motifs, the girl, the cat, and the ribbon. So these are all assembled. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so, and then you can push further so all the charts will show. Okay, so I think it's listening from some of the earlier talks, I think that we do maybe have an issue with trivializing the symbolic content of folk culture, right? So I try to do, now rereading my own article through this idea of folk culture. One could say that we underestimate this kind of discursive work, and it's very powerful discursive work that folk culture can actually put into action just simply iconographically, right? So in the article, I actually tried to show that the product Hello Kitty actually had a very important function in post-war Japan, which is recovering and all of that, and then trying to be capitalist. And the work, I know it's very kind of complicated. I think what I wanted to show is that it actually transformed gift culture in post-war Japan in a massive way. And it's part of a kind of a discursive agent in that transformation. And that transformation has to do with the shift from a ceremonial gift culture toward a, let's say, personal gift culture. And this personal gift culture would be something that is oriented to pleasure and non-obligatory, the lack of obligation. So one no longer expects a reciprocation, but rather it's a kind of freely given gift. And ultimately, what it did is eliminated the ceremonial, the ritual function of gift giving, and then put it together, and then instead emphasize the kind of gracious, which is a kind of affection based, and then a kind of solidarity. And so therefore, the gift function is retained, but at the same time, it's bourgeois, and it's made kind of adaptable for the middle class. And then finally, I wanted to can I go back to the second slide with the display case of Hello Kitty? Thank you. So one of the things I wanted to also point out as what the folk element of Hello Kitty is the support. Right. So given the highly mediatized age, one of the striking things about Hello Kitty is that, yes, it can make a YouTube video, it can make those things, but its primary support remains everyday objects. So we still want it as a kind of ornament. So it's the primary mode of distribution of this motif, as well as many other characters in Sanrio. So I like to think of that as a kind of foundation of thinking about folk culture. The way it's a kind of the way that it propagates in culture is not necessarily through media, but through, let's say, low-tech material objects. Okay, so thank you. That's it.
Thank you so much, Joy. That was very thought-provoking. If you've got any questions, just leave them in the chat box, and then we'll answer them at the very end. So our final speaker today is Jixiang Yang, and he has a PhD from Academy of Arts and Design, Tsinghua University. He's a lecturer in Hunan Normal University. His research interests include the history of graphic design in contemporary China and the history of contemporary graphic design exchanges between China and foreign countries. So I'll hand over to you now. Oh, you're on mute.
You're muted.
Yeah.
Okay, hello, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, we can.
The research title is From Farmer Images to the Political Philosophy, Chinese Dream Postures, 2012. Please, next slide. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, the first part is talk about the Chinese dream posters background. On November 29, 2012 years, Xi Jinping, General Secretary of Chinese Communist Party, CCP, first proposed the concept of Chinese dream when he visited the Road to Rejuvenation exhibition at the National Museum of China. The concept of Chinese dream through continuous enrichment and improvement has become his important political philosophy, which has had a profound impact on the development of contemporary China. In December 2012, in order to spread the political philosophy Chinese dream, China Network Television, CNTV, together with folk artists, designed 58 posters to publicize the political philosophy Chinese dream. The posters have been widely disseminated in China urban and rural areas through various media such as television, internet, printing, and have promoted Chinese people's understanding, acceptance, and support of the Chinese dream. Next slide, please. Is this? Yeah. The second part is talk about the reasons about highlighting farmer images in Chinese dream posters. The first reason is China has a large population of farmers. In 2012, the rural population of China was 631 million. Therefore, highlighting the farmer image in the posters can attract the attention of the masses of farmers and increase the communication effect of the Chinese dream. And farmers are an important driving force for the development of contemporary China. In the development process of contemporary China, farmers have shown such important characteristics as dependability and main force. Therefore, from a historic point of view, in the posters, the image of farmer highlighted in the posters shows that the makers and the designers affirmed that farmers have played an important role in the development of contemporary Chinese society and recognize that farmers will continue to play an important. Besides, farmers are important symbols of Chinese characteristics. The main requirements of this Chinese dream poster design are Chinese spirit, Chinese image, Chinese culture, and Chinese expression. Chinese farmers who have shown their indomitable spirit in the process of contemporary Chinese development are important symbols reflect the image of China. Chinese farmers have developed a variety of art forms with Chinese characteristics, such as paper cut, farmer painting, and color sculpture. They are important creators of Chinese culture. Therefore, the farmer image has become the main visual symbol in the Chinese dream posters. Next slide, please. The third part is about the farmer images in Chinese dream posters. Create farmer images through folk art. The 58 posters of Chinese dream mainly take the folk art forms that are popular in the vast rural area of China, such as paper, color sculpture, farmers painting, woodcut New Year pictures, etc., and cooperate with representatives of folk art to join, produce, and design posters. And presenting the typical Chinese farmers' images through direct and indirect ways. The ways to create a typical image of Chinese farmers in 58 Chinese dream posters include direct and indirect ways. The direct way refers to the direct display of farm images in the poster. For example, the poster shows farmers walking on the path in the countryside, farmers picking fruits, farmers eating together as a family, etc. The indirect way means the poster does not show the image of farmers directly, but shows typical objects and the scenes of rural life. For example, the cow ploughing the field, the chicken announcing the dawn, the duck swimming in the pond, etc. Besides, the image of farmer full of hope for the future. Each poster revolves around the topic Chinese dream and develops various dream topics about farmers, such as on the way to the dream, the sun shines all over the sky, running towards dreams every day. And the Chinese dream is fulfilled, and the people are blessed. The dreamers sing and laugh, etc. The farmers in the posters are cheerful and optimistic, full of hope for life. Last, concreteness of farmer images. None of the 58 posters use abstract design expressions, and all use concrete expression to shape the image of farmers. Next slide, please. The last part is about the political philosophy in the farmer images in the Chinese dream posters. Based on different visual symbols, the 58 posters made by CNTV with artists in the China show the three specific contents of the political philosophy, Chinese dream. The prosperity of the country, the rejuvenation of the nation, and the well-being of the people. Okay, that's all. Thank you.